The auction yard smelled of dust, sweat, and the kind of silence that sits heavy on a man's chest, the kind that makes people look away rather than face their own reflection in another's suffering. Old man Harlan stood among the crowd, leaning on the cane he didn't really need, pretending his back hurt more than it actually did. It wasn't weakness, it was a shield, a way to disappear into the noise of the world without anyone asking too many questions. His boots were cracked, his hat older than most men in the yard, and his eyes, faded by time, still carried the strange fire of someone who had lived through too many wars, too many regrets, too many nights where he wished he'd acted differently but never found the courage in time. The auctioneer called out another name, another number, another human being pushed to the front like livestock. The girl couldn't have been older than 16. Thin, trembling, wrists bruised from rope, her hair falling down her shoulders in tangled strands that looked like they once held sunlight. Her eyes, though, those were alive. Afraid, yes, but also burning, like a flame smothered but not extinguished. The crowd looked at her with the hungry eyes of people searching for cheap labor or cheaper power. Harlan felt his stomach twist. He had seen that look before, decades ago in the war, when people forgot other people were human. He hadn't been able to save anyone back then. But time was giving him one last chance. $5, he said quietly. The crowd laughed. The auctioneer squinted. The girl stared at him, confused. $5? Harlan, you ain't even got $5 to waste on a broom, let alone... $5, Harlan repeated. His voice didn't tremble. The yard hushed because everyone knew when that old man spoke like that, he would not be moved. The auctioneer waited for a higher bid. None came. Nobody wanted a girl too thin to carry heavy loads, too frightened to obey quickly, too unfamiliar with the language to follow directions. Sold, the auctioneer muttered, almost annoyed. Harlan walked forward, handed over the 5 crumpled bills, and reached for the rope tied around the girl's wrists. She flinched back. He didn't blame her. No ropes today, he said softly, not touching her. You walk when you're ready. The guard behind her frowned but cut the rope anyway. She rubbed her wrists, eyes flicking between freedom and fear, unsure which one was more dangerous. Harlan turned and began walking away, slow enough for her to follow, slow enough to show she wasn't being dragged anywhere. It took a full minute before her footsteps finally whispered behind him, hesitant but real. The town watched the two of them leave. One old man, one broken girl, and a tension so thick it felt like a storm waiting for the right moment to break. When they reached Harlan's cabin at the edge of the desert, she hesitated at the door. "Inside if you want," he said, placing his hat on a hook. "Stay outside if you prefer. Not my place to cage birds." She stepped in cautiously, glancing around the small wooden house filled with simple things. A rocking chair, shelves of books that looked unread for decades, a kettle warming on the stove. Harlan pointed at the kettle. "Tea, if you drink tea." She didn't respond, didn't understand most of the words, so he simply poured 2 cups and slid one toward her. She flinched again at the gesture, unsure whether it was kindness or trickery. The old man didn't push. He just sipped his cup and let silence bridge the language gap between them. After a long moment, she picked up the cup with trembling fingers and tasted the tea. Her eyes widened, not in fear this time, but in surprise, like her body remembered what warmth felt like. "My name is Harlan," he said, tapping his chest. He waited. After several seconds, she touched her own chest and whispered, barely audible, "Asha." Asha, a name that meant hope in a language he didn't speak, but somehow understood. That night, Harlan gave her the bed and slept in the rocking chair. She tried to protest, shaking her head vigorously, pointing at the floor as if she expected her place to be there. Harlan only chuckled. "Floor's too cold. Chair's fine. I've slept in worse." But she continued shaking her head, frustrated, like words were trapped behind her tongue. Finally, she stepped forward, lifted the blanket from the bed, and held it out to him. He smiled gently. "You keep it, child. That's yours now." Her eyes widened, fogging with tears she didn't let fall. That was the moment Harlan realized she wasn't used to sleeping anywhere except the ground. Or worse. Days passed. Asha rarely spoke, but she watched, learned, and moved with the quiet alertness of someone who had been trained by fear to anticipate danger before it arrived. Harlan didn't ask her to work, didn't treat her as property. Instead, he taught her slowly how to boil water, how to slice vegetables without cutting her fingers, how to feed the chickens, how to braid rope. Each time she learned something new, she'd look at him for approval with the heavy sincerity of someone who had never been praised. And each time Harlan nodded and said, "Good," a simple word, but it made her straighten like a sunflower chasing light. One night, as the wind howled against the windows, Asha woke screaming from a nightmare. Harlan rushed into the room, but she backed into the corner, shaking, whispering sounds he couldn't understand. He didn't touch her, didn't even come close. Instead, he sat on the floor far across the room and waited for her breathing to slow. "Nobody's gonna hurt you here," he said softly. "Not while I'm alive." She stared at him through tears, uncertain whether to believe it. But slowly, inch by inch, she crawled out of the corner and onto the bed. Harlan stood to leave, but her small voice stopped him. "Door open?" He smiled sadly. "As open as you want." Over the next week, she left the door open every night, and she slept. The nightmares didn't vanish, but they grew quieter. Sometimes she even woke with sunlight on her face instead of terror. Harlan began carving a small wooden bird in his spare time, shaping wings with more care than he'd given anything in years. When he finished, he placed it on the table beside her cup of tea one morning. She picked it up, marveling at the detail, then lifted her eyes to him. "Asha, free?" she whispered hesitantly. The question cracked something deep inside him. "You were free the moment those ropes came off," he said. She shook her head. "Paper. Need paper." She mimed chains breaking. She meant legal freedom, true freedom, something $5 hadn't bought, something only justice could grant. Harlan nodded slowly. "Then we'll get your paper." She stared, disbelieving. No one had ever fought for her. No one had ever promised her a future. That night she sat by the fire with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders and whispered, "Why you? By me?" Harlan stared into the flames. He didn't answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft. "Because once, someone should have saved my daughter, and they didn't." Asha didn't know all his words, but she understood the pain behind them. She reached out and gently touched his hand, the first time she'd made contact willingly. Harlan didn't move, didn't breathe. He just let the moment settle like dust on an old wound. And that was when everything changed. Not for him, but for her. Because Asha did something no one expected, something that would alter both their lives in ways neither could foresee. Asha stayed, not out of obligation, but choice. A choice that rewrote the silent rules inside her heart, a choice that whispered of safety in ways she'd never known. With each dawn that painted the sky orange over the desert, she learned more, moved with more confidence, spoke a little clearer, breathed a little easier. Harlan, for all his rough edges, treated her like the granddaughter life had stolen from him long ago, and though he never said it, she sensed the depth of that quiet affection. But what surprised him most wasn't her obedience or gratitude. It was her curiosity, her brilliance, her ability to pick up any skill placed in her path. She learned to read faster than he expected, tracing her fingers over the faded words in his old books, whispering them aloud like incantations breaking the spell of her past. She learned to sew, to fix small tools, even to mend the broken hinges of the chicken coop that Harlan hadn't touched in years. And one afternoon, when he returned from town, he found her building something out of leftover wood behind the house, a small table perfectly balanced, without anyone teaching her carpentry. "You made that?" he asked, astonished. She nodded shyly. "For you." It was the first full sentence she'd spoken without hesitation. Harlan swallowed hard, pretending his eyes weren't stinging. But while the days grew gentler, whispers began drifting around town. Whispers that the old man had bought a girl, for reasons people preferred to assume the worst about. In small towns, rumors bloom faster than weeds. Harlan ignored them, but Asha felt them. She saw the way storekeepers looked at her, the way mothers pulled their children away as if kindness were contagious and dangerous. Harlan tried to shield her from the cruelty of gossip, but Asha had lived through horrors far worse than words. Still, every whisper left a bruise somewhere inside. One evening she broke the silence. "Harlan, people think bad." He exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of a truth that refused to be ignored. "People think what they want, doesn't make it true, but hurts you," she said softly. He stared at her, surprised she cared about his reputation when hers was the one being dragged through the dirt. Nothing you do could ever hurt me, he said firmly. She frowned, thinking deeply. I want to help you. And she meant it. She wasn't content being someone protected. She wanted to protect, to contribute, to belong. The next day she disappeared early at sunrise without telling Harland where she was going. Panic hit him like a stone when he woke and found the house empty. Memories of the war, of losing people he loved, of failing those who needed him, surged through his chest until breathing felt like drowning. He spent the whole morning searching the desert, shouting her name, his voice rasping with fear. When he finally stumbled toward town, ready to beg the sheriff for help, he saw a crowd gathered near the blacksmith's shop. For a heart-stopping moment, he thought the worst, until he heard her voice. Asha stood in the center, speaking halting English to the sheriff, the blacksmith, the townsfolk, telling them she was not his slave, not his servant, not anything but someone he rescued, someone he treated with dignity, someone he gave life back to. Her words were broken, tangled, imperfect, but powerful. Harland, good man, she said loudly, chest trembling with courage. He saved me. He give me home. He give me... Name. The crowd fell silent. Even the sheriff, who prided himself on being unshakable, looked moved. Harland stepped forward, his voice rough. Asha, you didn't have to do this. She glanced back at him, eyes bright with purpose. You saved me. Now I save you. He wanted to scold her for wandering alone, wanted to tell her she'd frightened him half to death, but instead he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Pride. Real bone-deep pride. The sheriff cleared his throat. If what the girl says is true, Harland, we'll make it official. She stays here as a free citizen. Free, Asha whispered, the word trembling out like a bird finally released. But she wasn't done. She turned back to the crowd, tears burning at the corner of her eyes. You think I weak, she said, but he teach me strong. He teach me read, teach me work. I want be part of this town. And then she did something no one expected. She lifted her chin and faced the townspeople with the kind of strength that comes from surviving what most never could. Give me chance, she said. Her voice didn't tremble, and for the first time the town listened. After that day, everything changed. Storekeepers softened, mothers let their children wave at her. The blacksmith asked if she'd like to learn woodworking properly after seeing the table she'd made, and Harland watched as Asha stepped into a world that once rejected her but now began to see her as more than a rumor, more than a foreigner, more than a past wrapped in pain. She became an apprentice to the blacksmith, learning to carve, to shape, to build. Soon the town was filled with small wooden birds, each one carved by Asha, symbols of freedom perched on windowsills like whispers of hope. And one morning she placed a larger carved bird on Harland's table, its wings wide, ready to take flight. For you, she said, you give me wings. He touched the carving gently. No, he said, you always had wings. I just reminded you how to use them. Seasons passed. Asha grew stronger, her English fluent, her laughter filling the once silent cabin. And Harland, for the first time in years, felt the ache of loneliness fading, replaced with something like family, unexpected, unasked for, but deeply cherished. One night, sitting by the fire, Asha gave him a piece of paper. What's this? He asked. My first earnings, she said proudly. I want to pay you back. Harland shook his head immediately. I didn't buy you, child. I bought your chance. She smiled, a beautiful, quiet smile. Then let me buy your peace. He folded the paper and placed it back in her hand. You already have. And as flames crackled and stars glittered above the desert, Asha leaned her head against the old man's shoulder, a gesture of trust so pure it brought unexpected tears to his eyes. Harland, she whispered, you saved my life. No, he replied. You saved mine. The cabin stood warm against the cool night, the wooden bird on the table watching over them like a guardian of second chances. And though neither said it aloud, they both knew the truth. Sometimes family isn't born, it is chosen. And sometimes $5 can buy something far more valuable than freedom. It can buy redemption, purpose, and a bond strong enough to rewrite two broken stories into one healing one.